right. Joining me now, the aforementioned Kevin Hassett, former chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. And his piece is UAW Anticipating an Electric Shock. And Kevin, there's a compelling argument here and a lot of big numbers. So why don't you start us off and I'll try to help out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. Well, you know, I started studying the UAW strike earlier this week and then noticed something really dramatic, which is that the wholesale push to electric vehicles is an existential threat to the UAW. And the UAW is currently, posturing for a strike, and they're really serious about it because what's happening is that, Biden says that electric vehicles are going to create 1 million jobs. Well, currently there are 1 million people making cars in the U.S. that aren't electric. And if you make 1 million jobs for electric vehicles, then you're basically making everybody change their job, but it's not going to be the same people. And what's going on is the automakers are putting their new factories down in, like, Tennessee, which is out of reach of the unions, and they won't necessarily organize with the UAW. And the UAW is going to hemorrhage jobs. So it takes 40% fewer workers to make an electric car than to make a gas-powered car. And that really means that 40% of workers in the UAW are going to be out of work if the EV shift that Biden is advocating and subsidizing happens.
So Sean Fain, who's the new president of the UAW, understands all this. He probably hasn't even talked to you, but he's still probably a pretty smart guy. And he understands all this.
He is.
What else is at stake here? So you're talking about roughly 500,000 jobs lost. But you mentioned in your article, and I picked up on this, that doesn't include the sort of spillover effects. You've got people working in car dealerships and repair shops and gasoline stations. That, by the way, people working in diners and restaurants and all kinds of things. I mean, really, Kevin, a UAW strike against the big three could basically sink the entire economy. I mean, that's what it sounds like.
Right. Yeah, that plus the higher oil prices could definitely toss us into a recession. The bottom line, though, is that there are 1 million people that make cars in the U.S., but there are 7.5 million people that are related to the car industry. And so if the electric vehicle shift, it's a 7.5 million. But if the electric vehicle shift happens, then all the people who are skilled mechanics or all the people who own a gas station, all those people are going to have to radically change their lives. And the thing that is really distressing about that, of course, is that we've seen this before. When China entered the WTO, a whole bunch of factories all around the country closed, and people said, oh, the net benefit from trade will make up for it. But the people who lost their jobs in those small towns that closed their factories, they ended up being the subject of Angus Deaton, the Nobel Prize-winning economist's book about deaths of despair. And so there was massive, massive human costs for the factories closing when China entered the WTO. And by my estimate, this electric vehicle switch is going to be a bigger shock to American workers than China entering the WTO. And so it's really a potential, human catastrophe waiting to happen. And I think that, sure, I understand there are a lot of people that are really serious about climate change, and it's something that I'm not a climate denier, but you have to think about this transition and manage it better than they're doing. Right now, they're heading lickety-split towards 100% electric vehicle production in the early 2030s. And if that happens, then millions and millions of lives will be disrupted.
On that point, there's a couple of little nuggets that you mentioned I want to follow through on, get your take. Look, I'm not a climate denier either, okay? But 1,600 scientists put out this statement with a couple of Nobel Prize winners that there's no climate emergency. There's no immediate existential threat emergency. They say that climate is an issue, and they say that, climate transition and so forth, but there's no emergency. It's not something you have to do in the next 5 to 10 years, like get rid of gas-powered cars by, 2032, or raise the miles per gallon to, 65 or 70, or essentially decimate the trucking industry, right? You read trucks might have to spend $45,000 per truck to refit in order to meet the new emission standards, that kind of thing. In other words, Kevin, there's no emergency, so we don't have to have these abrupt changes which are going to cause strikes, job losses, and a sinking economy. That's my question to you. Where's the emergency? This is the flaw in Biden's thinking.
Right. Well, I think you're right. The appearance of an emergency is something that most people think, if you believe the models, the climate models, is way off. But there is a benefit to starting sooner, and right, because it's a cumulative effect, the CO2, and so starting sooner. Because there's an effect of moving earlier is something that you could have that policy argument, but to say that there's a current emergency, you're right, that justifies putting millions of people out of work, it just doesn't make sense to me. They're just ignoring real human cost, and they have to think about this transition and think about ways to manage it that doesn't create all these deaths of despair that we saw when China entered the WTO. I'm really concerned that there is a potential human emergency about what this transition is going to do to all those lives of people that spent their life becoming a skilled mechanic or becoming a skilled auto worker, and now all of a sudden you're out of a job, and so what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And I don't think that's anything that the Biden administration or frankly anybody that's been pushing these policies has really thought about and given us a solution to.
Kevin, two more in your provocative piece here. When China entered the WTO, okay, certain conservatives will never acknowledge, I think, that the China entering the WTO was a problem. But when they entered the World Trade Organization, they had higher tariffs and cheaper goods or more currency manipulation, all of which damaged American competitiveness and cost American jobs in these small towns. Is that what you're saying? Walk us through real quick, if you would,
right.
The China WTO
right.
U.S. manufacturing connection.
Right. Well, there's a really big and very interesting scientific literature on this. And what happened was that before China entered the WTO, then every year we had to make them a most favored nation. You remember they used to vote on that every year. And if we made them a most favored nation, then the Smoot-Hawley tariffs wouldn't go in effect on China. But if we didn't, then they would. And so people didn't want to locate their production in China because they were worried that we'd get mad, the government would get mad, and then let the Smoot-Hawley tariffs affect Chinese production. And so what happened, though, is that the Smoot-Hawley tariffs varied by goods. So they were really high for some things, really low for other things. And so what economists have done is they've looked at the places that were most protected by the uncertainty over the Smoot-Hawley tariffs and found that those were the places that ended up being the focal points for deaths of despair and so on after China entered the WTO, because the little mill towns that were being protected by the threat of Smoot-Hawley tariffs were no longer protected. And then everybody moved their production to China and people lost their jobs.
That's right. Well done. Thank you for that. That's a really important point. At some point in the future, we're going to come back and talk about the implications of that because they're still around. Last point, Kevin Hassett, the probability, the likelihood that the UAW is going to strike. I mean, they sound very unhappy with Biden. They're very unhappy with gasoline cars, the end of cars, very unhappy with the EV business and the subsidies. They're just very unhappy. They're not going to fall into line. But what do you think? Does the UAW actually go on strike?
Yeah, I think it's very, very likely, like say 90% likely. I mean, obviously, politics are involved, but I think the strike is very likely because if you look at the actual sort of factual statements, not just the sort of angry posturing of the UAW, then they understand the forces that you and I are talking about very clearly. They're experiencing them. And in fact, one study that I cite in the article found that already worldwide, 80,000 auto workers have lost their job because of the EV transition. 80,000. And so the UAW sees this already. They know about it, and my guess is it is an existential threat, and they understand it, right? If somebody points a gun at your head, you get nervous. And right now there's a gun at the head of the UAW because these folks are going to all lose their jobs, or many of them lose their jobs, and they understand it. So if I were president of the UAW, I would strike for sure. And my expectation is, if looking at their rhetoric, they understand why I would make that decision if I were them, and so I think they'll do it. And I think it'll be a long strike, too, if they have it, because these are existential issues. It's not just like another $10 an hour, that we're talking about. It's actually like who's going to get the job at the Tennessee plant that makes EVs? Is that going to be a UAW plant, or is it not?
It goes to the heart of Biden's entire obsession with immediate climate change. Kevin Hassett, you and Christy hang on to your gas-powered car. What'd you do here? You kept your gasoline-powered car?
Yeah, we have two gas-powered cars. In fact, I looked it up, and my car has the highest domestic content. the Acura MDX has the highest domestic content in the U.S. I looked that up when we were in the White House because I figured someone would be mad I was driving a Japanese car.
Nobody's smarter, nobody better than Kevin Hassett. Thank you, buddy. We appreciate it.